Welcome to the Selling to Corporate podcast, where we're going to be challenging your sales beliefs around selling to corporate organizations and help you increase your bottom line profits every single month. I am Jessica Lorimer, your sales expert and guide in this world of selling to corporate companies, skyrocketing your company sales and making the impact that you really want in the world. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show today, please do head over to iTunes and leave us a review. But enjoy this episode, and I am really looking forward to sharing some epic sales wisdom with you. Okay, we are here. We are in the new financial year, and I'm very excited. I also know that for a lot of our listeners, you'll be thinking, well, actually, Jess, I sell to companies in Europe or in the US, and maybe financial year happened at the end of calendar year, or you're selling to companies where their financial year happened differently. But for the majority of you in the UK or working with organizations who have their financial year end at the end of March and new year beginning at the beginning of April, it's an exciting time. And I'm really, really excited about financial new year. I don't know about anybody else, but I always feel like there's a really good second wind. Can we call it that? Or is that a bit weird? But I do. I feel like there's always a really good second wind around end of March, early April, where people have kind of settled into the year. I know that I've heard in 2024, a lot of people say that it's been a slow start or it's felt like it's been really sluggish. And I completely understand that. But I always feel like there's this new energy, which sounds a little bit woo, a little bit spiritual for me. But, you know, we are where we are. I can't fight it. There is always a new feeling of optimism and hope and positivity and adrenaline around March, April. So if you are experiencing that, yay, welcome to the club. And if you're not, don't worry about it. September might be the time for you. That's when I feel like the next big energy, adrenaline, oh my goodness, let's go sell everything kind of attitude appears. Excitingly for me, we've obviously just welcomed in a lot of new joiners to the C-suite. And honestly, it was kind of crazy. I wasn't expecting that many people to join. So if you did join, thank you very much. It's so exciting, genuinely, to have you guys who are inside the program and completing the sprint. And if it wasn't the right time for you yet, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry. I say to everybody, the C-suite is there when you need it. Yes, sometimes things like price changes or bonuses or whatever, but the reality is the program should be there to meet you when you are ready to join. And excitingly, we have this week started the sprint. I'm actually recording this a little bit later than normal. I'm usually super organized with all my batch recording, but I managed to get a few colds this year, as you may have heard from previous episodes. So I've been a little bit slow on my batching activity. And that means that I'm recording this literally the day after we started the sprint for the C-suite, which is super exciting because actually in the first day of the C-suite sprint that I'm running, the first task that we've done has resulted in 3 business development calls being booked for 3 separate people and for 3 referrals being made. So in just 24 hours, people have already started to see calls being booked. People have sent out their first ever emails, their first ever messages, utilizing financial new year beginning and to maximize this particular time of year. And it's really, really exciting to see the action being taken. And I'm genuinely so excited to see what happens at the end of the 6 weeks. I think it's going to be absolutely amazing. And of course, I'll be sharing key breakthroughs and things on the podcast as well, because I think it's always so helpful to learn from experiences. So keep an eye out and you will get to hear some of the amazing breakthroughs that are going to happen over the next 6 weeks. Now, today's episode isn't going to be a long one. I think we're probably looking at about maybe 15 minutes, she says. But it's a really important issue that's come up. And actually, it's something that is relatively simple to fix. So today we're talking about how you can avoid being ghosted by corporate decision makers. And I've split this down into a couple of sections. And when I was thinking about it, in the shower, that's where I do my best thinking. I don't know if anyone else is like that. If you are, let me know. That sounds really weird, doesn't it? But, you know, I just find water. Water is good for thinking or walking. Maybe I should have said that. But when I was thinking about this episode and recording it, I have heard from so many people over the last few weeks that It's been really frustrating. They feel like they just get ghosted by stakeholders all the time. And there's been a real feeling, particularly on LinkedIn with LinkedIn posts, where people are blaming stakeholders. They're like, oh, I can't believe it. It's so rude that stakeholders wouldn't reply to me and I'm being ghosted and it's not fair. And I completely get that. Sometimes it can be really hard. And I think that people often listen to this podcast and they're like, but Jess, it's fine for you. Everyone must reply to you. And it will surprise you maybe to learn that people don't. Not everybody prioritizes my emails. I have been ghosted thousands of times over the years, and I will probably be ghosted thousands of times more. But I think that there are a few important things to understand about being ghosted, and that's what we're going to go through today. There are a couple of important things to understand about how you handle it. And there's also something to be said for the way that we actually deal with it on social media. I think there's this temptation to be creating controversial content or to get a lot of discussion going. And this idea of blame game around stakeholders not responding to things, if they were ever to go and look at your LinkedIn, would they be thinking, oh, I'd love to work with this person? Because if you're sat there shouting about how awful all stakeholders are because they didn't reply to your emails in a timely fashion, I think that might put them off. So just be aware. I'm the first person to say that stakeholders are incredibly busy, that they're not scrolling the newsfeed. But in the event that they are, would you be somebody that they want to work with? Or would you be somebody that they'd be thinking, oh God, if I don't do something on time, they're going to read me out on social media? Because it's a very, very different vibe. I've really gotten to using that word recently, than selling to individuals, where maybe controversial posts are designed to get maximum engagement. Maybe they help you let off some steam. But you've also got to think about your buyers. How are you making them feel, or your prospective buyers? And if you're not making them feel great or you're shaming them, is that really going to be the kind of relationship that they want to enter into? Right? So just keep that in the back of your mind. Next time you're feeling a little bit frustrated, find a community where you can vent off steam privately rather than airing it to the entirety of LinkedIn and then wondering why your B2B sales processes are a little bit scuppered and people are a little bit reticent to build relationships with you. Obviously, if you are in the C-suite, we share a lot of challenges in there. So please feel free anytime. And I will happily go through whether or not you are being ghosted or whether actually there's something else that you could do differently. So let's dig in. Let's dig into ghosting. And there are, like I say, 3 things that I want to go through today that should help you stop being ghosted in the first instance and handle ghosting situations moving forward. So the first thing that I always think is helpful to know is what actually is ghosting? Because ghosting is a term for me that appeared when I started online dating. People started talking about ghosting. I'd actually never heard of it before. It wasn't something that we talked about when I was working in corporate sales. We just used to be like, oh, stakeholders haven't replied. Cool. So ghosting wasn't something that I'd really heard about until I started online dating. And that was quite a long time ago. But I found out about ghosting because people were like, oh, it's when somebody that you're interested in or that you go on a date with or whatever, they just stop replying or they block you. Now, I don't know, maybe I wasn't taking online dating all that seriously at the time, but I didn't really have the time or energy to go back through and see who'd blocked me. So I was ghosted by a whole bunch of people. I was quite busy in, I think it was 2012, 2013, something like that. So I wasn't really all that interested or bothered. But when I started my own business and I started to hear about people not getting replies from decision makers, whether they were selling B2B or B2C, that's when I started hearing about ghosting a lot. And that's when I started experiencing the pain of rejection that people feel about being ghosted. Because, when you are making offers to people, and let's be clear, I make offers to people a lot. I follow up with people a lot. I send out a lot of emails to corporate decision makers every single day. But when it's your own business and somebody doesn't reply, it feels a little bit more personal, right? Feels like you're getting rejected more. And the reality is you're not. It's just a normal level of rejection. And anyone who works in sales will tell you exactly the same, that it's completely normal. You will face a lot of rejection. It happens. But I also think that there are instances where people describe being ghosted that aren't actually ghosting from a sales perspective. So when we look at what it is, we are talking about ghosting as being a lack of response from a contact that you have a relationship with. Okay, so from a sales perspective, ghosting is when you are not getting replies or responses from stakeholders that you have a relationship with. Someone not replying to your lead generation, emails, LinkedIn messages, whatever else you're sending out there, is not them ghosting you. They don't have a relationship with you. They've literally no obligation to contact you or reply to you. It is not their job to spend all day, every day, going through their inbox and being like, oh, here are 500 outreach messages. What I should do is personally reply to every single one of them. And there are a few reasons for that. One, they're busy people. Two, they're not paid to do that. And three, most outreach now, people will automate. So even if they do respond, and I've experienced this, even if they do respond, they'll get another email and another one and another one, because for whatever reason, the tag on the system hasn't worked and they just keep sending stuff. There's a whole other lesson about email outreach there for you, but that's for another day. But I just want to be clear that when we're talking about on this episode, ghosting is lack of response from somebody that you've got a relationship with, not just a lack of response in a lead generation process where they have no obligation, unless your email is timely and relevant, they've got no obligation to come back to you. That's not their job. So I think we should all stop calling that ghosting, because it isn't. The second thing is understanding when we get ghosted. So if we can all agree that ghosting happens when you've got a relationship for somebody or with somebody and they're not replying, this usually happens after you send a proposal or when you're doing follow-up for something specific. So maybe you are checking in because they said, oh, check back with us in 3 months' time. And, if we've got a need then, or it's during your keep in touches. If you're sending out specific timely relevant things and they're not replying, or when you're asking for referrals and you're following up. Basically, anytime you are following up on something, whether it's a proposal, a keep in touch, a request for a referral, a request for a case study or a testimonial, if they are not responding and they consistently do not respond, that is ghosting. Okay. Now, what I've said there about consistently not responding is important, because if they don't respond to one email, I don't know about you, but my email is at 462 unread at the moment. Is that embarrassing to admit? Yes. But sometimes I'm just super busy and I'm still catching up from various time off and being in New Zealand and stuff from the TEDx and all of that kind of thing. It just means I haven't got around to responding as quickly as I want to. And honestly, my brain is like, well, if it's important, they're gonna email me again, so it's okay. And that's how most stakeholders think. So it's about that consistent follow-up piece. Okay. Now, if we can understand then that ghosting is about that persistent lack of response from somebody that we have a relationship with, we can also start to understand why it might be happening. So I think that there are 3 real reasons that stakeholders ghost. The first and most common is that stakeholders hate giving bad news. So if they have to tell you that something isn't happening, if they have to tell you that they suddenly can't give you a testimonial, if they have to tell you that your payment's going to be delayed, like whatever it is, if it's bad news, they hate giving it. So you can often find that stakeholders will ghost you if it's bad news. And that can be really challenging because it's not your fault. It's actually a lack of confidence on their part to have an open and transparent conversation about whatever it is that is going to happen or that hasn't happened. The second reason that stakeholders can ghost you is that we aren't sending qualified proposals. So most commonly, people get ghosted at proposal stage. They will spend hours and hours creating a great proposal, send it off to a stakeholder who was super keen on the call, and then never hear from them again. And this poor person who sent over the proposal will be like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? Is it something? Is it me? Is it the price? That always comes up. People assume that it was because it was too much. And the reality was, most of the time it's an unqualified proposal, or what I call a speculative proposal. In other words, we didn't have all the information that we needed to quantify that this was a real need from the stakeholder. Perhaps they used phrases like, oh, you write me a proposal and I'll find budget, or we don't have a defined budget, but you give me a proposal and then I'll go make the business case, right? Not having budget is a big issue. And it means that we can often send speculative proposals because we don't know what they want to spend. Not necessarily anything wrong with your price, but there can be a mismatch in priorities and investment level, right? It can also be that we haven't defined whether or not they've got sign off or whether they've actually identified a time frame for delivering the project. So sometimes we'll get ghosted because we didn't think to ask, well, when would this actually be starting? You might think they want to start next week, and they're actually thinking, oh, well, 7 or 8 months time. Not unusual. So sometimes, especially when it comes to proposals, we have to think about whether or not we're getting the right information before we're sending that proposal. Because if we're not, and then we're not hearing from them on it, it's often because it was in their mind speculative. Not necessarily in yours, but in theirs. And the final reason that we get ghosted is because we didn't set clear steps, right? We didn't set clear follow-up actions. So sometimes we'll get ghosted because we'll say to a stakeholder on a phone call, hey, can we get a testimonial from you for XYZ project? And they'll go, yeah, sure. But instead of being like, okay, cool, I'm going to send you an email. I'm going to give you an idea of the questions that, can be helpful in writing a testimonial, or, oh, hey, could we get that by next Friday? Because then I can use it in my newsletter. We just go, oh, okay, thanks. And then it's really awkward because then we have to follow up by email, and the stakeholder, probably really well-meaningly, is like, yep, cool, I'll do that. But it isn't a priority. And the same thing can happen for anything that we don't set next clear steps for, right? So if we want them to do something, or we want to have another meeting about something, or we want to know what budget they've got for something, we have to arrange those clear next steps. Otherwise, it's really easy for them to ghost us because they don't think they're ghosting us. They're just like, oh, we'll do that when we get around to it. Again, if it's not in the diary, it's probably not going to happen. Yeah. So make sure that when you're thinking about ghosting, you're thinking about A, whether you're actually being ghosted. Is it by somebody that you have a relationship with, that you have consistently followed up with? And B, why might you be getting ghosted? That then helps us to solve the ghosting problem, right? So it's I always think a really simple fix. Doesn't mean it's easy, right? But it does mean that it's simple to fix, because in the case of ghosting, prevention is better than cure. So if you find that you're getting ghosted at these 3 key stages, for example, if you're getting ghosted at proposal stage, ask yourself honestly, am I sending qualified proposals that I had all the information for, that I knew that the company had sign off for, that I knew what their budget was, that I knew and understood what timeframes they wanted to work to? Or did I send something and hope that they would get the budget? And if I did, then am I being ghosted, or is it that I just didn't qualify the opportunity and that I need to go back and redo that? If, for example, you've been chasing a process for months with no response, and they seem super, super keen, and you've been following up and you've just had nothing, well, consider that the stakeholder probably doesn't want to give you bad news. They don't want to say, hey, we're not doing this yet. Instead, they kind of hope you'll figure it out. So be proactive. Shut down the opportunity for them. Have a really clear, polite, and concise way of closing that opportunity down for them, and making sure that you leave the door open for them to come back to you in the future when they are ready, right? And of course, if you find that you are getting ghosted because you don't or haven't had next steps set with stakeholders during processes, it's fine to go back and reset those expectations and boundaries. Yeah, it's absolutely fine to go back to a stakeholder and say, hey, I'm just letting you know, like, my diary is filling up and I know that yours must be too. I really want to make sure that we get XYZ sorted for you. Are you happy to go through and work to this time frame on reviewing the proposal, having the decision made, whatever that might look like for you? It's absolutely fine to do that. And if they say, yeah, great, awesome, you've got the commitment there, the next steps. If they say no, you can figure it out and you can plan ahead appropriately. Okay. So super, super simple, super quick episode today, but really, really effective if you are always waiting on stakeholders, or if you feel like you're always getting ghosted. Make sure you bookmark this episode to take another listen to. I'll see you in the next one.